On April 24, 1944, 24,000 feet above Brandenburg, Major G. Rall felt his oxygen mask cloud with every strained breath as he pushed himself deeper into the seat of his Messerschmitt Bf 109 G6. He stared in shock as the American fighter clung to his tail through the steep diving turn. His headphones erupted with frantic shouts from the elite pilots of Jägerschwader 11, men who had dominated Europe's skies since 1940, now sounding like shaken recruits. Enemy at 6 o'clock high. He's still on me at 400 kilometers an hour. How is he still there? For 3 years, Rall had relied on a simple, unbreakable rule of air combat. American fighters could not chase German aircraft back to base. They didn't have the range, the ceiling, or the high-altitude speed. Yet the P-51 Mustang, screaming down on his wingman, shattered every belief that had kept German aces alive since 1941. Its Packard-built Merlin engine roared a killing tune at an altitude where thunderbolts and lightnings had once struggled to breathe. Even 600 miles from its English airfields, the Mustang carried enough fuel for another hour of fighting and still return home. Rall's own gauge gave him 15 minutes to reach Brandenburg. In a single morning, the entire equation of air power, range, height, endurance had flipped. The predators were now the prey, even over their own capital. What Major Rall witnessed that April morning wasn't just the arrival of a new American aircraft. It was the opening act of the Luftwaffe's systematic collapse. Within 1 year, the force that had terrorized Europe would lose 75% of its pilots, 90% of its experienced leaders, and complete air superiority over Germany itself. The weapon of this destruction was an aircraft designed in just 102 days, powered by a British engine, built in quantities that defied German comprehension, and flown by pilots who seemed to multiply faster than they could be shot down. The crisis had been building since August 17, 1943, when the U.S. 8th Air Force lost 60 B-7 flying fortresses in a single day attacking Schweinfurt and Regensburg. The mathematics of the bombing campaign had reached a critical inflection point. American bombers were suffering 25% losses on deep penetration raids, while German fighter production was actually increasing despite the bombing. General Major Adolf Galland, General Diegfleger had reviewed the numbers with satisfaction in his headquarters at Berlin. The Americans were losing bombers faster than they could train crews. Each B-17 carried 10 men, 10 highly trained specialists who required months of preparation. The Luftwaffe was trading one fighter pilot for 10 bomber crew members, an exchange rate that favored Germany decisively. The Americans must turn back at Aachen, Galland had told his staff in September 1943. Their fighters lacked the range to escort beyond the Rhine. We can therefore concentrate our forces, wait for the escorts to turn back, and then massacre the bombers at our leisure. The strategy was working. On October 14, 1943, Black Thursday, the 8th Air Force lost 60 bombers and 650 men in another raid on Schweinfurt. The American bombing campaign ground to a halt for 4 months. No major raids penetrated deep into Germany. The Luftwaffe had seemingly won the battle for air superiority through the simple expedient of geography, unknown to the celebrating German pilots, an extraordinary convergence of engineering genius and industrial might was already reversing their victory. The North American P-51 Mustang had been born from a British requirement in April 1940, designed in a mere 102 days, with the prototype flying just 149 days after contract signature, a development speed that would have been impossible in any other nation. Initially powered by the Allison V1710 engine, the early Mustangs had proven disappointing above 15,000 ft, precisely where bomber escort was needed. But in April 1942, Rolls-Royce test pilot Ronald Harker had suggested fitting the Mustang with the Merlin engine. This marriage of American aerodynamics and British power would produce the war's most decisive fighter aircraft. The Packard Motor Company in Detroit had begun licensed production of The Merlin engine in August 1941. Applying American mass production techniques to British precision engineering. By late 1943, Packard was producing hundreds of Merlin engines monthly, each one delivering approximately 1,650 horsepower at altitude, where German pilots had felt safest. Colonel Thomas Hitchcock, the American military attaché in London and former World War I pilot, had written a prophetic report in July 1942. The P-51 with the Merlin engine will be superior to any existing fighter in the world. Above 25,000 feet, it will have the range to escort bombers to Berlin and back. This single aircraft could change the entire strategic situation in Europe. December 1, 1943, a formation of Focke-Wulf FW-19s from Jagerschwade 2 approached American bombers near Solingen, confident the escorts had turned back. The pilots were veterans with thousands of combined victories, executing a well-rehearsed attack pattern they had perfected over 18 months. Escort dropping away, reported a staff leader, watching the P-47 Thunderbolts waggling their wings in farewell to the bombers. Beginning attack approach. But as the FW-19s rolled into their attack dive, urgent voices crackled through their radios. Indians still with the bombers. New type, maintaining escort. 8 P-51 B Mustangs of the 354th Fighter Group, the Pioneer Mustang Group, had remained with the bombers. Their drop tanks had given them an extra 150 miles of range, enough to extend escort coverage deep into Germany. The German pilots, conditioned by 18 months of uncontested attacks on unescorted bombers, were psychologically unprepared for fighter opposition at this distance. December 13, 1943 brought a more comprehensive shock. The first major raid with substantial P-51 escort penetrated to Kiel, 420 miles from the nearest Allied base. 16 P-51 BS of the 354th Fighter Group not only escorted the bombers, but engaged in aggressive, rather than waiting to be attacked. Major Georg Peter Shaw, ATA commanding 3JG-1, encountered the Mustangs near Bremen. A veteran with 78 victories, ATA had developed specific tactics for each Allied fighter type. The P-47 could be outmaneuvered at altitude. The Spitfire lacked range. The P-38 Lightning couldn't turn with German fighters, but the P-51 defied categorization. First contact at 7,500 m altitude. Eder reported to YAG Corps headquarters. Enemy fighters maintained speed and maneuverability superior to our Bf-109G. At this height, pursued my Starl for 30 km before fuel considerations forced us to land. Enemy continued escort mission without apparent fuel concerns. Oberfeld W.E.L. Heinz Koka, a 33 victory ace with JG-11, wrote in his diary on December 20th. The appearance of American fighters over Hanover has shaken everyone. We used to take off leisurely when bombers approached, knowing we had time to gain altitude and position. Now we must climb immediately or risk being bounced by escorts. The war has come to our doorstep. The P-51B's performance statistics when German intelligence finally obtained accurate data in January 1944 caused disbelief at the highest levels of the Luftwaffe. Speed 440 miles per hour at 30,000 feet, faster than any German fighter at altitude. Range 280 mi with drop tanks, double that of any German fighter. Ceiling 42,000 feet. Service ceiling higher than comfortable. Operating altitude for German pilots climb 3,475 ft per minute. superior to the Bf-109G. Above 20,000 feet armament 650 caliber. Machine guns with 1,880 rounds, enough for extended combat. The Mustangs. Laminina flow wing provided. Unprecedented efficiency. The wings. Shape maintains smooth airflow to 60% of its chord, reducing drag by 30%. Compared to conventional designs. This single innovation provided the speed and range that made long-range escort possible. From February 20th to 25th, 1944, Big Week unleashed the full force of American air power on Germany's aircraft industry. More than 1,000 bombers and 900 fighters, including 150 P-51 BS, struck aviation plants across the Reich in carefully synchronized attacks. For the first time, U.S. fighters were not only shielding the bombers, they were actively seeking out enemy aircraft. During Big Week, the Luftwaffe lost 355 fighters, but the more devastating blow was the death of nearly 100 seasoned pilots, many of them veteran formation leaders. These Staffelkapitän and Gruppenkommander carried irreplaceable combat experience, and their absence created a widening skills vacuum throughout the fighter corps, leaving new pilots with no one to guide them. March 4, 1944 marked a turning point, the first American bombing strike on Berlin with a full fighter escort. 660 B-17s and B-24s, protected by P-51 Mustangs, P-38 Lightnings, and P-47 Thunderbolts, filled the skies above the capital. Adolf Galland himself scrambled to meet the attack, leading a makeshift force of Bf-109Gs. His report to Göring was stark and uncompromising. We were outnumbered 3-1 by escort fighters. The Mustangs held the altitude edge, the speed edge, and the tactical initiative. We succeeded only in damaging 3 bombers before being dispersed. I personally was chased for 50 kilometers by 2 Mustangs who had enough fuel to play with me like cats with a cornered mouse. The sight of American fighters soaring above Berlin shattered the last illusion of German control of the air. Civilians who had long been assured of Luftwaffe dominance now looked up to see silver Mustangs looping above the Brandenburg Gate. Whatever remained of the regime's credibility, already weakened by battlefield losses, fell even further. By April 1944, Mustang pilots had perfected a ruthless new method. After finishing escort duty, they would drop to treetop height and strafe anything of value on the flight home. German airfields that had once been safe the moment Allied bombers passed overhead now turned into death zones. April 13, 1944, demonstrated this new reality with brutal clarity. After escorting bombers to Schweinfurt, 42 Mustangs from the 4th Fighter Group descended on German airfields across Bavaria. In 30 minutes of concentrated strafing, they destroyed 51 aircraft on the ground, damaged 23 more, killed dozens of ground personnel, and destroyed irreplaceable maintenance facilities. By May 1944, the Luftwaffe faced a catastrophic pilot shortage. Monthly losses exceeded 25% of operational strength, while training programs produced increasingly inferior replacements. The average German fighter pilot in 1944 received 110 to 160 flight hours before combat compared to 400 hours for American pilots and the 250 hours German pilots had received in 1941. By early 1945, some German pilots entered combat with as little as 80 hours total flight time. Aust Johannes Mackie Steinhoff, commanding JG-77, documented the crisis. We received children as replacements, boys of 19 with minimal training who have never flown above 5,000 m, never fired at a moving target, never experienced high-G maneuvers. We must send them against American pilots with 400 hours training, many with previous combat experience. The quality differential became a force multiplier for American effectiveness. Captain Don Gentile of the 4th Fighter Group, who had scored 21 aerial victories, observed, by spring 44, half the German pilots we encountered were easy kills. They fly predictable patterns, failed to use clouds for cover, and panic when bounced. The old hands were still dangerous. You could tell immediately by how they flew, but they were increasingly rare. The strategic bombing campaign against German oil facilities intensified in May 1944, created an additional crisis that multiplied the P-51's advantages. German aviation fuel production plummeted from 180,000 tons in April to 20,000 tons by September. Training flights were curtailed, then eliminated. Combat operations were restricted to decisive engagements. Meanwhile, American pilots flew training missions over Germany itself. P-51 groups would conduct fighter sweeps, offensive patrols designed to find and destroy German aircraft. With unlimited fuel, American pilots could loiter over German airfields, waiting for defenders to take off, then attack them at their most vulnerable moment. The introduction of the Messerschmitt M262 jet fighter in summer 1944 briefly raised German hopes. With a top speed of 540 miles per hour, the M262 was 100 miles per hour faster than the P-51D. Hitler saw it as a wonder weapon that would reverse the air war's trajectory, but the P-51 pilots quickly developed tactics to counter the jets. They would loiter near Me-262 airfields, attacking the jets during takeoff and landing when they were slow and vulnerable. The Mustang's superior range meant they could wait patiently for opportunities. The Me-262's technological superiority was nullified by operational realities. The jets required high-grade fuel, increasingly unavailable. Their engines needed replacement every 10 to 25 hours. Impossible with disrupted supply chains. Most critically, they required experienced pilots for effective operation, but the Luftwaffe had few veterans remaining. Notable Mi-262 pilots like Franz Schall, credited with shooting down 10 P-51s, and Georg Peter Ada, who claimed 9 P-51s among his 12 jet victories, achieved individual successes, but these victories had no strategic impact. For every Mustang shot down, dozens more appeared. By autumn 1944, P-51s had shifted focus to Germany's transportation network. Operating in squadron strength units, they attacked locomotives, rail yards, bridges, and canal locks. The German economy, dependent on rail transport, began systematic collapse. On September 11, 1944, 36 P-51s from the 357th Fighter Group destroyed 81 locomotives in a single day. The 357th Fighter Group would eventually claim the highest number of air victories, 595.5, of any P-51 group in the 8th Air Force. Reichsminister Albert Speer wrote in his diary, "The American fighters have achieved what the heavy bombers couldn't: complete transportation paralysis. Coal cannot reach power plants, parts cannot reach factories, food cannot reach cities." Beyond statistics and strategy, the P-51's dominance inflicted profound psychological trauma on German pilots. Men who had entered service as elite warriors experienced complete demolition of their worldview. The Mustang pilots displayed a confidence that demoralized German opponents. They flew aggressive aerobatics over German cities, performed victory rolls over airfields they had just strafed, and dominated every engagement with overwhelming numbers and superior training. German pilots developed fatalistic humor about their situation. A joke circulated through fighter units: "What does a German fighter pilot need for an Iron Cross? Sir, a P-51 escort to the cemetery." The gallows humor masked deep demoralization. April 7, 1945 witnessed the Sonda Commando Ella operation, one of the Luftwaffe's final large-scale missions. Approximately 180 to 200 B-109s piloted, mostly by inexperienced volunteers, attempted to ram American bombers in a desperate suicide mission. The results were catastrophic. American fighters claimed approximately 130 to 140 German aircraft destroyed while losing minimal numbers themselves. The Luftwaffe effectively ceased to exist as a fighting force after April 1945. Though aircraft and pilots remained, the will to fight had evaporated. Unit commanders stopped ordering missions. The once proud force that had terrorized Europe was reduced to hiding its remaining aircraft. The final statistics of the P-51's impact tell the complete story. P-51 production and combat record. Total produced 15,586 aircraft. Enemy aircraft destroyed in aerial combat 4,950. Confirmed. Enemy aircraft destroyed on ground 4,131. Confirmed. P-51s lost to all causes 2,520. Kill ratio approximately 3.6 to 1 in aerial combat. German pilot losses. Western Front 1944 over 8,000 killed. Missing 1945 January to May over 3,000 killed missing. Total fighter pilot force decimated. Luftwaffe strength declined January 1944. Approximately 1,600 operational fighters. June 1944 1,480 operational fighters. January 1945 1,000 operational fighters. April 1945 325 operational fighters. Training hours. Comparison: American pilots 1944 to 45, 400 plus hours before combat. German pilots early 1944 160 to 220 hours. German pilots late 1944 110 to 160 hours. German pilots 1945 some as low as 80 hours. Military historians universally acknowledge the P-51's decisive role in achieving Allied air superiority. The United States strategic bombing survey concluded the P-51 fighter, more than any other single weapon, won air superiority over Europe. The P-51 made possible three critical achievements: the continuation of the Daylight Strategic Bombing Campaign, the achievement of air superiority before D-Day, the systematic destruction of German transportation and oil infrastructure, North American aviation's production miracle deserves recognition. The company produced one completed Mustang approximately every 90 minutes at peak production. The Englewood and Dallas plants together employed tens of thousands of workers, with women comprising 40% of the workforce. This production achievement contrasted starkly with German manufacturing. While exact German production figures remain disputed due to incomplete records, it's clear that American fighter production far exceeded German capacity. The United States produced more P-51s alone than Germany produced of all single-engine fighter types combined in 1944-45. The American pilot training system proved as decisive as the aircraft itself. By 1944, the United States Army Air Forces operated one of history's largest educational programs. Each pilot progressed through primary training 65 hours, basic training 75 hours, advanced training 100 hours, operational training 160 plus hours. This systematic approach produced pilots who arrived at combat units with 400 plus hours of flight time, including extensive gunnery practice, formation flying, and combat Tactics. German pilots, by contrast, increasingly arrived at frontline units barely able to handle their aircraft, let alone fight effectively. The P-51's influence extended beyond World War II. It demonstrated that air superiority resulted from systemic advantages, training, production, logistics, and technology integration, not individual pilot skill or aircraft performance alone. Former Luftwaffe ace Adolf Galland later admitted the P-51 was not necessarily superior to German fighters in every aspect, but it was good enough in all aspects, produced in overwhelming numbers, flown by well-trained pilots, and supported by unlimited resources. This combination was unbeatable. At a 1975 NATO conference, General Gunther Rall, who survived the war with 275 victories, reflected on the P-51's impact. The Mustang didn't just defeat the Luftwaffe, it destroyed the very concept of air superiority as we understood it. We thought in terms of individual combat, pilot skill, tactical victories. The Americans approached warfare as a coordinated system built on mass production and long-range strategy. They were fighting a fundamentally different conflict, one they were destined to win. By 1944, the transformation was absolute. The Luftwaffe that had stormed across Europe from 1939 to 1941, that had nearly beaten Britain, that had controlled the eastern skies, was dismantled piece by the industrial might of a democratic nation. The P-51 Mustang was the tool that delivered the blow, but the real power lay in the society that created it, a nation capable of designing a fighter in just 102 days, producing more than 15,000 of them, training pilots on an industrial scale, and projecting that strength across continents to seize complete air supremacy. German pilots who scoffed at American aircraft in 1943 never imagined the P-51 would annihilate the Luftwaffe because they never grasped the country behind the machine. They focused on individual aircraft when they should have focused on the factories. They counted enemy pilots when they should have counted training schools. They measured flight range when they should have measured industrial output. By the time the reality of American power became clear, the moment for resistance had already passed. The pursuers had become the pursued, and the skies over Europe now belonged to the Mustangs. The collapse of the Luftwaffe was not only a battlefield defeat, it was proof that free nations, once fully mobilized, could unleash a level of strength unimaginable to authoritarian regimes. In the end, the P-51 Mustang demonstrated that victory in modern warfare depended not on heroic ideology or supposed racial superiority, but on the practical forces of mass production, organized training, and logistical mastery. German pilots never expected to be overwhelmed by the Mustang because they never expected to confront the vast productive engine of American democracy. When the truth finally reached them, it arrived from the wrong side of 6.50 caliber machine guns, high above the burning remains of the Third Reich.